Hi, this is Mashnu, and I have here a beautiful game for you. This is a game that was played in 1956 between the Spanish Grandmaster Roman Toran and Victor Korchnoi, well-known Grandmaster. And again, just like in my previous video, we have the Alekhine defense, e4, knight f6. This time another variation is played, but again black has a very clear plan in this variation, and that's what I like about this Alekhine defense. There are some strategic ideas that come back each time. Let me show you. e5, knight to d5, and now not c4 like in the previous video, but d4 and d6. This is actually the most common variation in the Alekhine defense. Knight to f3, and here there are two very common moves. One is bishop to g4. The idea behind that is to trade the bishop for this knight and later to attack this d4 pawn. So trading one of the defenders of d4 and then attack these central pawns. But in this game not bishop g4 is played, but the move g6 that has, well, a similar idea in the sense that black wants to place the bishop on g7 and with that have influence in the center, attacking these pawns that are on dark squares, these two white pawns. So what we see here actually is that already in the opening black starts making a plan for the middle game. And that's something very important to understand, that already in the opening you don't just develop for development only. You develop your pieces according to ideas that arise in the opening, so you can use the pieces on the right places later. So that's why this bishop is placed on g7, because the main idea for black will be to attack these two center pawns. Now let's continue. Bishop to e2, bishop g7, castle, castle, and now white plays c4. So white wants to get rid of this annoying knight on d5, and the knight goes to b6. And what white doesn't want to let happen is that black takes on e5. I mean, imagine black playing first knight to c6, then taking on e5. There will be a pawn here remaining on e5 at a certain point, and that pawn will be an easy target to attack. So what white does here is he plays e takes d6, c takes d6 is answered, and now white continues with knight to c3. Black moves the knight to c6, and we see here that it is all about this d4 pawn. So what black is trying is following the next plan. He wants to later fix the center with d5, move the bishop to g4, trade it for the knight on f3, so then a defender of d4 will be gone, and then have all the pressure with his light pieces on d4. And also the knight from b6 can be used to attack d4, but it will be rerouted, and you will see that in the game. I will explain to you just a few moves later, because now white plays bishop to e3, reinforcing d4 even more, bishop to g4, and now white plays b3. Now why b3? The fact is that here black is threatening already to take on f3. Bishop takes f3, and white cannot take with the bishop back, because then knight takes on e4, c4. The c4 pawn is hanging, and white of course doesn't want to take with the g pawn, because that would be ruining his own pawn structure and the defense of his king. So that's why he plays b3 here, to support c4 and be able to retake on f3 with the bishop. d5 played by black, and black is not afraid of white's following move, c5. This passed pawn, the c pawn of white is not that dangerous. It's actually quite difficult for white to make advantage of this pass pawn, all because of the weakness of the d4 pawn. We will see in the game that it's very difficult for white to make use of this pass pawn. Now, where does the knight from b6 go? Perhaps our first thought would be to play the knight to d7 and then place it on f6, where we often see a knight, yeah? But that would be completely against black's strategic ideas. We don't want to have the knight on f6. What black wants to do now is to reroute this knight from b6, bring it to c8, and then advance the pawn from e7 to e6, then bring the knight to e7, and from e7 to f5, where he's attacking the d4 pawn. The whole strategy of black is based on the weakness of d4, attacking d4 with as many pieces as possible. White here played h3, bishop took on f3, bishop takes f3, and now e6 as planned. Now, this position here has been played many times in Grandmaster games, and there are several options. In the game, the move b4 was played, but let me show you a few others. Rook to c1 has been played, queen to d2 has been played, and even g4 has been played here by Grandmasters. I will not go into those other variations. Let's stick to the game. b4 is played. Now, taking on b4 would be a mistake for black, because then if knight takes b4 here, then rook to b1, and white has the half open b file. Here the knight has to go away again, and then the rook takes on b7, and this is better for white because of the b file that is owned by the rook. So black doesn't take on b4. What does he do? A move that we see more often in this type of positions, a6, to slow down the advance of the b pawn. Now, white was not very impressed by this, so what he did is he played b5 anyway. After a takes b5, he played knight takes b5, and it looks as if white is following this plan to enter on d6, but in fact it's not a very dangerous thing, because black plays here simply his own plan, knight to e7, and here if white would play knight to d6, then we simply continue with b6, undermining the support of this knight on d6. If here rook to b1, then we take on in c5, takes c5, and rook takes a2, and after another move, our next move will be knight from e7 to f5, and then trade it for this knight on d6. So this beautiful knight on d6 has a very short life to live. Let's go back to the game, because knight to d6 was not played by white. He played here queen to a5. He played here bishop to g5. Bishop g5, pinning the knight on e7, so preventing knight to f5 temporarily, because queen to a5 is played now, attacking the knight on b5. White takes the knight on e7 first, so he wants to get rid of one of the attackers of this d4 pawn. After knight takes d7, he plays queen to d3, defending his own knight on b5. Now the black knight from e7 goes back to c6, and black continues with the same idea of having more and more pressure, maintaining the pressure to d4, especially now that white has a light squared bishop. So this bishop will never be able to defend the d4 pawn, and black has a dark square bishop, so this bishop will be able to attack the d4 pawn. So we can say that this, what Jeremy Silman calls imbalance in the position, is in favor of the attack for black against this d4 pawn. let's see how the game continued. a4, b6. So now black is willing to trade these 2 pawns here in order to continue having a white pawn on a dark square that can be attacked, and also having 2 connected pass pawns in the center. Of course, at the moment it's not possible to retake because of the bishop taking the rook. C takes b6 was played by white, so he doesn't want black to trade on c5, so he takes on himself on b6. Queen takes b6, and the attack continue in that case against the d4 pawn. Rook f to d1, giving more support to the pawn. Rook to a5, queen to c3, rook f to a8. So we see now a shift in strategy of black, because white has 2 weaknesses. One is the d4 pawn and the other one is the a4 pawn. So black is attacking simultaneously both weaknesses, and it becomes very difficult for white to defend those. It looks as if he finds a way by playing rook a to c1, attacking now the knight on c6. But what happened here is a bit of a surprise. Black played knight takes d4, something that, if we look superficially, it's impossible to do this. It's not a good thing because white has sufficient defenses. The knight, the queen and the rook were defending this d4 pawn, but there is a tactical idea that if knight takes d4, the knight then is pinned by the bishop. So rook takes a4 follows, and now this knight on d4 will fall. So the piece will be regained by black, and black will be 2 pawns up and will have a very good position. Now because of this, white played rook takes d4, and now it's important that black does the moves in the correct order. We could take on d4 immediately, but there would be a mistake. In this kind of position where pieces can be taken and be traded, we have to calculate. Let's see, if bishop takes d4, then knight takes d4, rook takes a4, but we don't have this pin here, so that means that this knight can simply move, for example, to e2, and then white will have 2 light pieces for a rook and 2 pawns. Well, it's still better for black, but not as beautiful as in the game happened, because here black found a far better move, and thus rook takes b5, actually taking the defender of the rook. So after a takes b5, bishop takes d4 recaptures the material, and now black is simply a pawn up, and the pawn on b5 is also very weak. At this moment we should make a new plan with black. If we were playing here this game, we should ask ourselves again, okay, what is happening here in this position? One thing that is important is the weakness of f2. Another thing that is important are these 2 potential pass pawns, well, 2 pass pawns actually, that can advance. And another one is the weakness on b5. Now about b5, this is a pawn that is on a light square, so this bishop is able to defend that pawn, and we cannot attack it with our bishop. So attacking f2 is probably a better idea. Let's see how this continued. Queen to d2, rook to d8. So black defends now the d5 pawn, so he threatens to start advancing here his e pawn without losing the d pawn. White played bishop to d1, so now the danger of taking here is not more there. So e5 is played, and after queen to e2, then the rook is free again to move. It doesn't need to defend the d5 pawn, so it's used to attack the b5 pawn now. Rook to b1 defending, and now queen to c5. The plan behind this queen to c5 move is actually to make this b6 square available for the black rook. Not only to stop this pawn, this b pawn, but to use it again to use these three pieces against the f2 pawn. So once again black is concentrating on the weaknesses of white, and black is using all his pieces to work together in his plan. Here, well, perhaps it would have been wise to play something like king to f1 to go all out of this pin. But what white did is he played g3. Rook to b6 followed, king to g2, so now he is out of the pin, and black played king to f7, rook to b3, and now e4. So with e4 we are seeing that the black pawns are advancing. Still black has the option of putting pressure on f2, and now with the pawn on e4 it's difficult for white to advance this pawn to get rid of this, because there is a chance of taking en passant there, but there is also the option of simply keeping these two pawns here and using them to advance. Queen to a2 was played now, queen to d6, queen to d2, bishop to c5, bishop to c2, threatens to take on e4. No, it's not true, because the queen is defended, so that's not correct saying that. Queen to e5 is played now, queen e2, and rook f6. And after rook f6 it was actually a move that was the last 5 moves we saw this move actually coming, move to f6, and here white resigned because he's going to lose material anyway. There is no way of defending this f2 pawn that will be taken by the rook. So let's summarize, because this is very interesting, that the ideas for the plans of black start already in the opening. Already here black starts with the idea of attacking the center pawns in the dark squares, and all his moves are connected to this main strategy of trying to attack the weaknesses of white, fixing the center, then trading this defending knight, and then preventing counterplay of white, and then continue with his own attack against these weaknesses of white. So I hope you found this interesting to see, and this evening I will do a broadcast. So it's today the 4th of July 2011, and I will do a broadcast with the theme, the topic, how to make a plan. And in fact this is already something that you can use, looking at what's important in a position, what are the imbalances, what are the characteristics of a position, and then with that having an idea, where do I want to have my pieces in that case to attack the weaknesses of my opponent, and then start calculating. Only then start calculating, not earlier. Alright, thank you for watching this one, and I hope you can use this in your own games. Alright, goodbye, and I'll see you next time.